Welcome back to another episode of Endurance Icons. I'm your host, Mark Cullen, just me solo today, and going to try a bit of a different episode today where I'm going to answer a bunch of questions that I get as a coach, but also that we were sent through the Endurance Icons YouTube and Instagram. So I'm going to go over a bunch of topics around my own coaching philosophy that we've been asked, and hopefully you get some value from this one. And if you have any questions in future episodes, you can comment on this podcast on YouTube or send us messages on Instagram if there's specific topics that you'd like us to cover around endurance, and we will do our best to do some research, bring some experts on, and also answer them ourselves. So just recapping some news in the endurance world, it's been a super exciting time in the thick of kind of summer here with a lot of racing across running, cycling, and triathlon. So if you haven't been keeping an eye on the ultra running world, Courtney Dauwalter has been on fire. She smashed the Western States record recently. We just had Katie Scheid, who finished second to her, on and talked a little bit about the magnitude of what she did at Western States there. But the crazy thing is she backed it up a couple weeks later and won the Hard Rock 100 as well, which is another super epic, crazy climbing race at altitude. And so she just did the double and set the combo record between those two races as well. So she's just doing some amazing things. And if you watch any of her post race interviews, she's just the most humble person ever. So hopefully we'll be able to get her on the podcast someday. But Courtney Dauwalter doing some amazing things. The Tour de France is in the thick of it right now. We're in the final week right now, and it has been wild with Pogačar and Vingegaard for the longest time, kind of neck and neck at 10 seconds apart for almost the entire tour. And then the time trial, Jonas just went off with just an epic performance in that time trial and ended up putting, I think, about a minute 40 into Tadej on that stage. And Tadej finished second, was faster than Wout van Aert. It was pretty wild, and one of the maybe best time trials we've ever seen in the Tour de France, or maybe in the history of time trialing. He, especially 2 weeks into a race, that was pretty incredible what he pulled off. And then the next day he really cracked Pogačar on the Col de la Loze, which is an epic climb there. And wow, yeah, put another 4 or 5 minutes into him. So it's all but wrapped up at this point. And Wout van Aert just went home to celebrate the birth of a new child that he just had. So I guess they were feeling like, we got this wrapped up. Wout can go home and enjoy some family time there, but he definitely made the right choice there. And upcoming this weekend, we got Ironman Lake Placid. This will be an exciting one for the men, especially because it's the final qualification for the Nice World Championships coming up this year. So in that race, we got Joe Skipper, Mikey Weiss, Matt Hansen, Cody Beals, Ben Hoffman. I think a couple of those guys either aren't planning to go to Ironman World Champs or are, or are trying to qualify for it. So I know Ben Hoffman and I think Matt Hansen are both trying to get slots there, and Mikey Weiss, but Cody Beals, I think, has said he's not going, and Joe Skipper, I think, is already qualified for it. But I know he's been saying that he's been going for the win on this race. So it should be an exciting race at a super awesome venue. In the women's race, we got Sarah Crowley, Jenna Nett, Rach McBride, and Jody Robertson. So I think anybody in those kind of top 4 or 5 people in that race could take home the win there. So I know they have Ironman live coverage for that one. So I would keep an eye on that one, because that's going to be an exciting race at that was my first Ironman. So one of my favorite venues there. All right, let's get into it. So I have about 12 to 14 questions here that I've been asked either by my athletes through Instagram or have come through the Endurance Icons pages. So going to address a couple of these. And like I said, please send us any questions you have. We'll do a periodic episode like this and answer a bunch of questions. One update around kind of our own training, a bunch of people ask us this, but essentially coming up, Jess has 13 weeks to Kona. So both of us are racing a local Olympic distance called Blue Water this weekend. And then we're both going to be racing in Ironman Mont Tremblant in about a month's time. Jess will be doing the 70.3 that day, and I'm doing Ironman Mont Tremblant. And then I got to turn it around 4 weeks later to go again at Ironman Maryland. So attempting a bit of a Cody Beals-esque fall here, where I'm going double Ironman in 4 weeks. I kind of like the timing of it, that I could do one Ironman, kind of recoup, get a little bit of sharpness back, and then go again without having to really put in another big training block. So hopefully be able to ride out that same fitness level between the two, and hopefully have some mental capacity for the second race of the doubleheader. But super motivated. Training's going really well for both of us right now. We're doing some higher volume in this part and are really absorbing it well, and just have good demeanors right now, which I find when you're deep in an Ironman block and kind of feeling like crap, that a lot of times your demeanor can be a little in the dumps, but we're both super positive right now and seem to be absorbing the training well. So excited for a little hit out this weekend. And then, Jess will be racing Ironman World Championships in Kona. So we're going to be doing lots of prep training wise, but heat prep and nutrition prep and stuff for the specifics of that race. So we'll keep you updated of some of the stuff we're doing in those coming weeks to make sure that she's prepped for that. All right, let's get into some questions here. First one I got was, how many kilometers per week do I need to be running for an Ironman 70.3? So I get this question a lot of people thinking you need to run like a certain amount of kilometers. It is really dependent on the athlete and kind of their past history, both their time in the sport. So an athlete who's obviously maybe come up with a track background and has run a bunch of mileage in the past might be able to run a little more frequently and be able to ramp up a little quicker, versus somebody who's maybe not ever really put in proper run training before. So it's really dependent, and also like their injury status in the past. Have they tried to do 4 or 5 days a week and got injured in the past? Running, especially when I look at my Ironman athletes, I honestly don't have most of them running more than, call it like 3, 4, kind of a max of 5 days per week, just because running is such a high stress one. I'd rather err on the side of making sure people stay injury free so that they can stay consistent. So like even myself these days, I do about 4 runs a week, a Wednesday workout, a Sunday long run typically, and then 2 smaller bricks in the week. So I actually don't run a ton of times per week or overall mileage, but I know I can do lots of work on the bike and swim, which are low impact and low risk to injury, and still be able to forge lots of fitness and still put in some good run sessions, but just my risk of injury is way lower. So yeah, in terms of kilometers per week, you need to be running for an Ironman 70.3. Like I would say it's more of like a frequency type of thing and kind of periodizing it. So first of all, frequency, I feel like with any of these disciplines, you need to be kind of doing them at least kind of 3 times a week to really be able to make progress across them. So for an Ironman 70.3, if we looked at like a weekly schedule of you running like Monday or Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, giving a day between those, you could look at having like if you were periodizing it, starting out with mostly all easy running. I think that's where people run into a lot of issues, is right away they're trying to run a max effort 5K every week and they're like, oh, running, I hate it, it's such a grind. But if you just back it off, put in, call it 3 to 6 weeks of just like easy running where you're slowly building the volume. So that first week could be something like 2 20-minute runs and a 30-minute long run, and then building from there, maybe adding like 5 minutes a week to each of those runs and doing that for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks of just like easy aerobic running where you could have a conversation with the person beside you. To really build that base foundation. And then from there, you could kind of start to add in a little bit more intensity. So maybe that's just starts by adding on a Wednesday run where you add maybe some shorter intervals of like 10 times a minute easy, minute hard, minute easy in a run like that, and then being able to scale up. So with our athletes, we always recommend putting in a nice kind of return to run base period, and then you earn the right at that point to be able to add intensity in. So no exact kilometers needed, but just stick to that 5 to 10% rule in terms of building volume week over week. So not adding more than 10% to any weekly volume. So if you were doing 10K the first week and you're only adding 10-ish%, you should probably only be adding 1 or 2 kilometers to that. So just being smart and patient on running. The quicker you ramp up, the quicker running's going to get you injured and kick you backwards pretty quickly. So of all the disciplines, that's the one you really got to be patient on and be smart. All right, next question I got was, I'm struggling to fit strength into my Ironman training program and have a race in 8 weeks. I don't want to get injured for the race, but also don't want to overdo it with strength during this time. So this is going to come down again to kind of a periodization type of thing. So with a race in 8 weeks from an Ironman, you definitely don't want to be, you're in the thick of your endurance time and really don't want to be adding additional stress that you're not going to be able to absorb. So if you're adding something like an intense strength program to it at this point, then all your endurance stuff is going to suffer. So at this point, you could maybe look to intro like a 2 by 20 or 30 minute sort of very light body weight session that is kind of focusing on key areas. So a lot of that kind of stuff around running. So whether it's doing some body weight squats, some hamstring type of work like a single leg RDL, maybe some glute bridges to make sure the glutes are firing, calf raises, kind of soleus type of raises as well. Just focusing on some of those key areas to make sure that they're getting a little bit of strength work, but you can't do anything that's going to take away from those endurance workouts. And then what I'd recommend is kind of once your Ironman's done is where you could go back into a base strength period where you could be doing like 2 or 3 good solid strength workouts a week where you're doing kind of compound lifts. So whether it's some heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, other work like that, where you're actually using barbells, dumbbells, heavy weights like that, where if you are sore the next day, the load that you have during endurance during that time is probably lower from both an intensity and volume perspective. So it's not as big of a deal to be adding strength in there. It can sub in a lot of that time you're spending in kind of the big volume of an Ironman block right now. So right now, my recommendation would be start with light activation work, maybe some core stuff in there as well over the next 8 weeks, but nothing that's going to take away from your endurance workouts. And also in terms of placing them, maybe do them the same day as you had a key session so that it gives the most amount of time before your next key session to make sure that you can absorb that training. And then, go back to that base in the off season. And essentially what I do is that my heaviest lifting, if you want to break the year into a quarter where you go like almost off season or foundation season, we call it, into a base, a build, and then a race season. So if we looked at those in quarters, my 2 heaviest times of the year are going to be that off season and base season. And then really I just go to maintenance mode in the build and race season when the demands of the endurance are a lot higher. And I just can't, you only have so much load that you can take on unless you're a pro athlete that can be recovering and napping between workouts. Like us that have full-time jobs really have to realize that we do have a breaking point and something's going to have to give. So you can't do it all and you need to scale things depending on the time of year and the capacity that you have. All right, next question. I've cramped up and been depleted in energy wise in my last few long distance 70.3s. What do you recommend for fueling both products and amounts? All right, so this is definitely a key topic when you get into those longer endurance races. So maybe I'll go over a bit of kind of a carb load and then also some recommendations around bike and run fueling. So typically in this, I'm going to talk about 3 kind of core things, which are going to be carbs per hour, sodium per hour, which is usually in milligrams, and then also hydration amounts per hour. So first off, like I'm definitely a big fan of a carb load in the day before. You just got to be super smart to not throw your gut off. But usually we do something around 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. So myself being like a 70 kilogram athlete, I'm aiming for something around 700 grams of carbs in like the 1 to 2 days leading into a long distance event like this. And I'm getting a lot of it from like adding extra maple syrup to my oats in the morning or drinking like a couple juices during the day. It's not me sitting down with like just this massive mound of pasta and being so full and lethargic by the end of it. So there's a lot of creative ways you can get some dense high carb things in the day before. Also in those days before, I'm usually adding like these precision hydration 1,000 tabs. So they have 500 milligrams of sodium in them. And I'm just adding those to my water in the days before as well. So people get in a tendency to drink a ton of water in those days leading in, but they forget to add sodium to that as well. And they just end up flushing their system. So make sure you're adding sodium in the days prior. And that sodium load is super helpful for the race day itself. And then when I wake up that morning, I'm usually getting in something like close to 150 grams that morning, whether it's a combination of like a bowl of oats with fruit in it and maple syrup, and then probably sipping on like my precision hydration drink mix that has a bunch of sodium and carbs in it as well, almost right up to the start. And then during a race, so maybe I'll go over more of a 70.3 type of plan. So typically on the bike, you want to be aiming for somewhere in the 60 to 90 grams per hour of carbs. So this is definitely trainable over time and things you want to test in training before you just throw those into a race. So back in the day, I used to do more like 60 to 70 grams an hour. I've trained myself up to be able to take on about 90 to 100 per hour now. And that's really helped with my energy as I get onto the run. So I'm usually aiming for, I say most athletes should be aiming for something in the 60 to 90 grams per hour of carbs, and then something in the 500 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium per hour. This is going to be very athlete dependent, depending on their sweat rate, but also what the conditions are. So the hotter it is, the more sodium typically I get athletes to take. And if you get a chance, go on the Precision Fuel and Hydration website and you can fill out a cool kind of custom questionnaire there, and it'll build you essentially a plan for your race around carbs, sodium, and hydration that you can follow. And I think it might be a shock to a lot of athletes. You might be underdoing it on one or some of the elements in there. And then when it comes to hydration on the bike, I'm usually aiming for something like a standard 750 milliliter bottle. But again, the hotter conditions and bigger athletes or athletes that sweat more are typically moving somewhere closer to that 1 liter or even 1,250 mils an hour. I've even had athletes go up in a hot race. A bigger athlete with a high sweat rate could be taking on something like 1.5 liters per hour, but we would be pairing sodium with that so that, again, they're not flushing their system. And then they'd probably be, we look at sometimes in the hot races to separate out the carbs and the sodium, where I find in cooler races, you can kind of have a lot of it in the same bottle. And then when we move to the run, a lot of what comes down to on the run is if you've done a good job on the bike fueling. So especially in something like a 70.3, where most people are running something in the 90-minute to maybe close to 2.5 hour range. If you've done well on the bike, you don't need to go crazy on the run, but the more you're pushing that limit, the more important it is to be getting in a good amount there. So usually on the run, I say something in the 40 to 60 gram per hour range, more if you can take it, but that would essentially be like taking a gel every 25 to 30 minutes on the run. And then just staying topped up on that sodium. So I usually bring some sodium like capsules with me and just take them as I'm going up to an aid station where there's going to be water. So I usually aim for something like 500 milligrams per hour. Again, athletes that are bigger or sweating more might need to supplement a bit more with that. And then I'm a little less meticulous on the water, but I just make sure I get water at every single aid station to both drink down and cool myself. You know, it's hard on the run to get water at some of the aid stations. So just grab a couple cups, even walk for a couple seconds on each one. It'll be worth it in the end versus plowing through those and then ending up dehydrated and your performance falling off at the end. You're probably going to end up in a better spot if you just do a short walk through an aid station and chug down some water and make sure you keep that hydration level. All right, let's go to just touching on that again. Ironman stuff, usually the demands a longer day like that are slightly higher. They're not exponentially higher, but you definitely want to bump things up, as you got to think about an Ironman. You're missing multiple meals during a day too. So you really got to stay on that fueling, hydration, and sodium. Next question I had, how do I choose my bike and run paces for an Ironman or 70.3? So yeah, this is a great question too. And you can do this like pretty science-based, based off of kind of if you have data on your kind of bike FTP or your bike FTP or some recent run result races or your run threshold pace. So if I'll use I'm just going to use kind of a sample bike FTP and run threshold for this. So run threshold, typically for most athletes, really fast athletes, it could be close to their half marathon pace. And then slower athletes, it might be closer to their 10K pace. A lot of people, if you go somewhere around there in between half and 10K pace, you'll get somewhere in that threshold pace. Kind of the feel of it is it's a good hard effort, but you're not like really dying like you would be in a 5 or 10K, and you can do lots of work at it, and it doesn't break you down a ton. So when we talk about, let's do a 70.3 first. So I'm going to use an athlete that has an FTP of roughly 200 watts. And let's use a threshold run pace of about 5 minutes per K. So if we use those, so let's go to a 70.3. So most athletes for a 70.3, I'm going to use bike power here. Can you hold something between around 77 to 84% of FTP? So an athlete doing more like 6 to 8 hour half Ironman might be looking closer to that 77 to 79% of FTP range. An athlete in the 5 to 6 hour range might be going into those low 80s, and then an athlete going under 5 hours might be able to go closer to 83 to 84% of FTP. So for an athlete that for example, like a 200 watt FTP and is doing, call it 5 to 6 hours, so they're going at roughly 82% FTP, their target would be something like 165 watts, and that would be their effort on the flats. They'd go slightly higher on the uphills, not crazy high, like still probably keeping it below FTP unless it was really steep, and then keeping kind of power on the downhills somewhere in that 110 to 150 range until they kind of run out of gears. So that would be kind of what you'd target for a half Ironman. Those same athletes, it's much lower for an Ironman. So a lot of times for an Ironman, it's going to be closer to about 68 to a really fast athlete might be going closer to like 77% of FTP. But yeah, those athletes who are going probably 12, 13, 14 hours are going to be closer to the upper 60s percentage of FTP. And then those athletes who are going 10, 11, 12 hours might be in the low 70s. And then athletes going under 10 hours might be closer to 72, 75, maybe closer to 73, 74, 75, even 76% in there. And then when we talk about run paces, so we'll use that 5 minutes per K threshold type of run. So it's definitely going to be significantly slower than your open run paces. So if, say, this athlete, we have their threshold pace at about 5 minutes per K, meaning they probably ran a half marathon somewhere around 5:05 per K. Half marathon being like an open, pure half marathon race, not in a triathlon. So most athletes, we'll go 70.3 first. Those athletes could hold somewhere in the like 86 to 87% of threshold pace in that. So if their threshold pace was 5 minutes per K, they could do something like 87% of it, which would be about 5:45 per K. So a fair bunch slower than what you'd do in an open race. And say if that athlete, their threshold, say if they're more of an athlete that's like under 5 hours, they could hold closer to like 90 to 92% of threshold. So that would be more like, let me double check that one, 5 divided by 0.92. And they'd be looking at more like a 5:20, 5:25, still much closer to that threshold pace. When we talk about the run, they'd be looking somewhere, a slower athlete might be more like 73 to 75% of their threshold pace. And then, so much slower. So if it's that 5 minute per K athlete, their threshold, then if they're going like 13 plus hours, that might be closer to like 73% of threshold. They would be looking at more like 6:45. So much slower during this. And then an athlete who's maybe going closer to under 10 hours could be holding something like 82 to 85% of threshold. So getting closer to almost what some of those athletes can hold in a 70.3 who are going a little bit slower. So in the end, essentially the faster of an athlete you are and the less time you're out there, the closer to that threshold pace you can be holding. And then I didn't touch on the swim, but essentially swim, if you've ever heard of a CSS test before, you can Google that, and essentially gets you to do a 400 and a 200-meter time trial in the same workout with with a warm up and some time between. You plug that into the online calculator. It'll give you your critical swim speed for 100. And then essentially in these races, you're just swimming usually a couple seconds per 100 slower. So faster athletes might be even the 70.3 and iron distance only like 1 to 3 seconds slower than their critical swim speed, where maybe a slower athlete out there for closer to an hour, or in a 70.3 or 2 hours in a Ironman might be swimming closer to 5 to 8 seconds per 100 slower than their CSS. So moral of the story is most of these you'll be slower than your open paces. So you just got to be honest with yourself, and you got to plug it into these kind of online calculators, and it'll give you a good idea of how to make sure that you go out at the right pace. It's easy to go out too hard on a lot of these disciplines and then blow up in the back half, where if you have a good parameter to set, you can be smart in that first quarter or half, and then set yourself up to finish strong and have a good experience. All right, next question. How can I get better at swimming? Wow, very open-ended question, but lots of options there. Some 3 things that I think are essential to really improve people's swimming. So first, swim frequency is, I think people try and hop in a lot of times 1 time per week and expect to make swim gains. I really think for most athletes, a minimum of 2, but they're going to get a lot more benefit off 3 or 4 times per week, just getting that feel for the water. And it's amazing how much better you'll feel the water when you're in there a little more frequently and have less days between each of those. So swim frequency, I think, is a really good one. Next one is both the drills and the type of workouts you're doing. So one of the biggest mistakes I see is athletes, when they start swimming, they just want to go in and swim continuous for as long as they can and just try and extend that out every single time. And while it works in theory, you're much better off first learning how to do some foundational drills. Swim is so form-based that if you can nail some of these drills that help you with your breathing, your body position, your catch and pull through the water, those are going to make a huge difference in allowing you to be comfortable and flow nicely through the water. And then also the complexion of the workout. So not just swimming continuous, but breaking it down into smaller intervals. So when I first started swimming, I would do a ton of 50s and just make sure I could hold good form for each of those 50s, take 10 to 20 seconds between each of those, do a bunch of those, versus trying to swim 1K continuous and my form just falling apart and me slowing down. I could put together a bunch of continuous 50s, grow kind of that distance over a number of weeks. So then I was doing 100s, 200s, and then by close to a race, I could do something like 5 by 400 at race pace with 20 or 30 seconds between, and I could do those all at the same pace and know that I could hold that kind of in a race when I got there. So drills and breaking the intervals down and having a mix of different workouts throughout the week is super important. And one of the biggest things I can recommend is either videoing yourself or getting a coach to watch you swim on deck. It's amazing what we think we're doing versus what we're actually doing in the water. And there's so many awesome YouTube videos out there these days where you can take a look and see a bunch of that good swim form and really ingrain that in your head so that you do that as you go to the pool. But if you can get somebody to watch it and somebody with some experience to break it down, if someone can break it down for you, that will go a long way to helping you make swim gains a lot quicker than trying to do it yourself. All right, next question I got. Do you recommend doing workouts fasted? I've heard a lot about fat adaptation and I'm thinking of doing some more fasted workouts in my week. I think there is a time and a place for fasted workouts. Most of the athletes I work with are doing some decent training volume, most doing close to 5 up to 20 hours a week. So I really think fasted workouts are dangerous for a lot of athletes like that. And I think they really need to be placed at a certain part in the year if you're going to do it. I just think the risk is really high with them, especially from like an energy deficiency standpoint, is you're already probably waking up depleted and then you're going out and burning more calories and you've dug yourself this hole. And I think underfueling is a massive reason why a lot of athletes get to an overtraining status when probably they're not actually doing that much training, and also get injured because they don't have nutrition to absorb the workouts and recover from them. So I'm personally not a big fan of fasted workouts, and think if they're being used, it might be something in a base season for a super short and sort of low intensity workout, where maybe you're just looking to maybe shock the system a little bit, and what they call it, almost like embarrassing your system a bit, so that in the future it maybe goes to some of those fat stores a little bit. But essentially what I do a little more often is almost like lower carb, sort of longer workouts. So it might be a longer ride at a pretty lower intensity. So if we're talking like bike FTP, they might be doing something in the like 60 to 70% range. So like even under an Ironman effort, so very in control. And I might get them to do like half of what they'd usually do in a carb workout, or delay when they start to take in the carbs and then take in the carbs from there. So they don't end up in a super depleted state in terms of their calories, but they got a chance to kind of activate a little bit of that fat burning system. So that's kind of how I use it a little bit with my athletes. But in the end, like, it's a super risky endeavor if you don't have good control over it. And if you're already probably under fueling, then it's just a quick recipe to end up at an overtraining status and also injured. All right. What do you do for fitness tests and workouts? So more and more, it's funny. This is one of those coaching philosophies that I've definitely changed over time, as I feel like more and more I used to use like FTP tests and max time trials in workouts to get like baseline testing for my athletes. But more and more I'm finding you can gain so much from just the week in, week out of kind of staple workouts. So even if you're doing something like a 5 times a K with 3 minutes easy between them, and tracking something like that over time, or tracking just how their heart rate and power is doing on easier or tempo efforts, and taking a look and tracking over time that way, versus having these like kind of monumental fitness tests where people need to go to the max, and there's this emotional and physically like draining experience. And I feel like you only have so many of those in a year. I think Cody Beals said it really well when he said, like, I'm going to save those really max efforts for when I need them in those 5 to 7 key races or efforts that I need them in a year, and not waste them in training. So I think more and more you can draw a lot from just looking at your trends over time. And then, so from like a pace, heart rate, RPE status at different interval paces, and then using some of those race results to back that up as some of those max efforts. But every now and then I think it's good to even do like some B races where you maybe aren't going fully to max in a race, or like some just below max sort of like fitness tests. So maybe you're doing more like a 5K at 10K pace, where it's not this max effort where you're puking at the end of it, but a chance to, like, when the athlete does it, get a good idea of pace of it, how they felt in it, compare the heart rate maybe on past stuff, and be able to draw a lot for future training zones from that, versus having to do these max effort fitness tests. So I think more and more I'm moving away from those, just because I want athletes to stay motivated, not be afraid of these. They are a good chance for athletes to kind of test themselves a bit, but I think it can be done without going to these max effort time trials as much. All right, next question. What supplements do you take? So personally, I'm not a diehard supplement person. I think there's maybe some more I could take, but I haven't dove too deep into the research, and we have an awesome sports nutritionist who's talked about a bunch of them in the past. But really the main two I use is I do magnesium before bed. I do find it helps me sleep a little bit better. And the one I've been experimenting with a little bit more is caffeine. I personally was having issues taking like gels and stuff with caffeine, but I bought some like caffeine pills that I take now. And I'm just messing around with kind of the doses before and during training of how I can keep that zap, because I'm not like somebody who loves to wake up and drink like a coffee necessarily. That's more of a post-workout enjoyment thing for me. So to get that caffeine zap, I've found it's kind of nice to have some of those caffeine pills. I'm definitely diving more and more into the literature to make sure that I'm not doing anything too extreme with that caffeine stuff that's going to affect me in the long term. And I use it sparingly, maybe before some of the key workouts, just to give myself a little bit more of an edge and in racing. So it's not like I'm waking up every day and cranking 400 milligrams. I wait for some of the key workouts, and I'm usually taking 100 to 150 just to give a little bit of a lift. And I'm finding it's definitely helping me kind of mentally and give me kind of a bit of an energy boost in some of those. Not that I wake up tired, but anything to lower the RPE or make a workout, maybe pull up your level a little bit more in a workout is definitely helpful in there. All right. Next question. What are some of the best investments I can make to go faster on the bike? I think biggest thing people forget about is fitness in the end is the one that's going to do it the most for you. So I think being an athlete who invests in some sort of training program or structure, at least learn about it yourself so that you know how to train properly and how to make progress. I think fitness is one of the biggest things people underestimate as the way to go faster. And they're always looking for these things they can buy. Investing in something like coaching is definitely probably the best way to make sure that you're improving there. But there are a lot of other things you can invest in to go faster on the bike. People often jump right away to buying a new bike or like expensive carbon wheels in terms of like money per wattage gain or speed gain. Those are two of the worst ones, unless you're like riding a big heavy city bike. Like if you have like an entry level triathlon or road bike with like some sort of decent wheels on it, like making those investments and spending thousands on those to gain not that much wattage is maybe not the first spot to go. One of the biggest ones I think is bike position. So getting a professional bike fit on whatever your bike is, whatever bike you're riding. Especially for triathletes, like the more and more time you can be comfortable and spend in that aero position, the quicker you're going to be on a course. All it takes is you to spend half of your race out of aero and give away so much free time, where if you could invest in a bike fit, you can get a lot of free speed by being more aerodynamic and comfortable and spending more time in that position. Some other ones that definitely make a big difference is an aero helmet on the bike. Our heads are huge sails, so if you can get in a good position and get an aero helmet that really kind of fills that gap between the back of your head and neck, and that's going to be different for each person and the position they get into. An aero helmet is a massive time saver. And then also good tires on a bike. So if you're if you're riding your old trainer tire, you're definitely maybe giving away some free speed there. Your bottle setup is definitely an important one. Those between the arm aero bottles help to fill some of the speed there. And also trying to limit the ones you have like directly on the frame. And then sticking bottles like behind your saddle is a more aerodynamic spot. I'm actually somebody who keeps a bottle on my frame still, just because I found that I wasn't able to get the nutrition, or I would lose it out of the back cage when I had it before. And I opted to give away a few watts of aerodynamics on the frame, but prioritize nutrition on this, because I know I will drink and get all my carbs and fluids and sodium in from those bottles if it's on the frame. So you got to give and take and make sure that you're optimized across both the aerodynamics, but also the nutrition side of things. And then there's also a lot of interesting stuff coming out around both chest fairing and calf sleeves. So if you've seen a lot of people in long distance triathlon races putting like a bottle or a Camelback or something in there, there's been an interesting like Triathlete Mag article on how that kind of being in the front of your tri-suit can help to push some of the air away and make you more aero in there. And then you also see a lot of the pros wearing calf sleeves these days. So the main part of that being that the calf sleeve material is more aerodynamic and kind of dissipates the wind better than skin. And then, so those are some interesting ones. You're seeing a lot more this year is the chest fairing and calf sleeves with the pros. And those are more cost-effective ones. You can put like a empty 1.5 liter bottle in there or a Camelback or something and get some free speed that way without having to buy $3,000 wheels or a $6,000 bike. So lots of awesome investments you can make to go faster on the bike. All right, so that is all the questions I have for this week. So again, if you have any more questions that you want me to address around anything endurance, I can either do the research myself or bring an expert on to banter about these topics. So feel free to comment on Instagram, send us a message on Instagram, or comment on this YouTube, and we will tackle all of those topics that you want to hear around endurance. So have a great weekend and happy training, and we will see you all for an awesome episode next week. Cheers.
Wow, how great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.